Welcome to the Federal Innovator, a video podcast series. I'm George Jackson with GovExec TV, here with my co-host, Dr. Jennifer Sample, Managing Director at Accenture Federal Services. Jennifer, great to see you again.
Great to be here. Thank you.
This episode is on logging into the future of identity. On September 16th of 2020, let me take you back. The European Union announced that all partner states should be moving toward digital-first identity solutions. Countries in Southeast Asia are also moving in that direction. The country of Singapore, for example, has something called SingPass, which allows citizens to interact with more than 700 government services. The United States is making progress too. They're creating a more centralized digital identity, namely login.gov. But new technologies like blockchain, distributed ledgers, tokenization, and verifiable credentials offer new possibilities for furthering federal progress on digital identity. Here to discuss these exciting developments, what's possible, and more, we're joined by two experts in the field of identity and access management, or IAM for short. Amir Helmi is Federal Identity, Credential, and Access Management Manager, the U.S. Department of Labor. Amir, good to see you, sir.
Thank you. You too.
And his colleague here, big part of our conversation, Rayan Farouk. He's IAM Capability Lead at Accenture Federal Services. Rayan, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
So, gentlemen, let's talk about the state of digital identity in the U.S. I teed it up at the top of our conversation here, but what's been done? What benefits are stakeholders seeing? Are there still gaps? A lot of questions. Amir, maybe you kick us off, sir.
Sure. So we call it the authentication journey here at Department of Labor, and we've been taking a number of strides in getting to our final destination, which is FIDO 2.0 and DDI, which is digital decentralized identity. So we're working to improve and moving that into that direction. Some of the gaps that we've seen is, digital divide individuals. We kind of mitigated that with our UI, our unemployment insurance, and working with the Postal Service with over 19,000 locations to be able to verify identities and do identity proofing as well. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for growth in the identity industry.
Farouk, I saw you nodding vigorously during part of that opening salvo from Amir. What stood out to you, sir? What would you like to add on there?
I'd say from a government-wide perspective, login.gov has definitely been a step in the right direction, centralizing the citizen interaction with government services, at least at the federal level. I'd say where we still have the biggest gap, above all, is private sector consumption and use of government-issued information. So take the Social Security number, for example. You watch the news in the cybersecurity space, you hear breach after breach of personally identifiable information. And a lot of the time, that information, the particularly valuable information, is government issued. Currently, we don't really have a framework or method for the government to securely issue and enable citizens to present their information so private sector entities don't have to store it. Regulators like the SEC and others have tried to force companies to secure their information better. They've made some progress, but to fully address the issue, we'd really need some source from some guidance from the government perspective for private sector entities to store and manage government issued information.
If I could stay with you for a moment there, Rayan, what type of guidance would you expect? Is that from the White House? Is that from NIST? Is that from CISA? Is that a little bit of column A, B, and C?
Actually, I should probably rephrase that. So less guidance and more better means of consumption. So if you take the SSN, for example, you're given a card, it has a number on it. And if you need to consume a financial service, for example, you just enter that number in that financial service. Over the course of a person's life, you open a lot of bank accounts, you interact with a lot of services, you probably entered your SSN 100, 200 times. And all those entities, in a lot of cases, are just storing that SSN. And basically, your personal PII attack surface is just increasing by the year as you interact with more services. A way around that is actually instantly the verifiable credential. So VC, or verifiable credential, is a cryptographically backed token to basically you can present your information as its issuer can issue you an SSN, and then you can present that in a way that to a verifier like a financial institution without that financial institution actually having to store your SSN. And this can be applied to things like mobile driver's licenses, which is currently an initiative several states are undertaking, be applied to things like birth certificates. And really the benefit, even from a citizen perspective, is it streamlines information entry into government services, reduces error, and can provide a means for private sector entities to get that information securely and also without storing it themselves.
It's great context, and thanks for clearing that up for us. Amir, I also mentioned ledgers, blockchain, Rayon's talking about verifiable credentials. These are all important concepts or pieces of this new era we're seeing in identity. How do they confirm digital identities at the Department of Labor?
So that's definitely on our roadmap. We don't leverage blockchain as of today, but to kind of write off of what Rayon was saying with digital identities, being a part of a number of working groups for the federal government, GSA does understand the realization that, given the remote situation and what's happened in the past 3 years, a need for a digital ID. Kind of what was mentioned with the digital driver's licenses, for instance, in the state of Maryland, but a digital PIP, right? Not only to be able to authenticate logically, but physically through NFC, and then having that all on this one device, right? So that's it is. So I'd say this is certainly on our roadmap. It's something that not just Department of Labor, but all federal agencies are trying to move towards, given the current climate, what's been going on the past couple of years.
Rayon, Amir mentioned, blockchain, at least taking a look at it, not really in practice yet at Department of Labor. The PIV card, why COVID makes the case for a digital identity. Weigh in on this aspect of things. How do these capabilities support? How do they confirm digital identities? But also, why is the time right now?
So with the blockchain distributed ledgers, I previously mentioned verifiable credentials, but these two are basically means to store information, any information, and ensure that information maintains its integrity, and you have a log of everything that's happened to that information since it was used. A blockchain infrastructure can be used as a backbone for a lot of things, even beyond identity. The European Union, for example, they have the EBSI, or European Blockchain Services Infrastructure, which is a EU-wide service provided from public sector to the private sector and to member states to consume and leverage basically a blockchain infrastructure to store information such as digital identities, but also for other use cases. That this provides a backbone really to a lot of use cases that might not have been thought of yet. So for example, you could have tracts of land are tracked in a blockchain, and ownership and information about that tract of land can be tracked through the ledger.
What could a holistic digital identity solution look like in the U.S., and what technologies would go into supporting an offering like that? What's needed to get there?
Well, I think it need allowing individuals to prove themselves online, comprehensive, secure, integrated biometric system, like was mentioned, blockchain. I think having that infrastructure to be able to support it, but I think more importantly, be able to have those policies and those standards, either through this as or some entity to be able to discuss a framework that would, for example, with passkeys synchronization. There's a lot of talk with regards to how passkeys, whether they're synced or unsynced, and the attack surface on the sync fabric for passkeys as well as an example. So I think one of the biggest things is, coming together in a lot of these government working groups to be able to discuss what that looks like for the most part.
And To follow on, digital identity is mainly talked about in the context of people, like you said, biometrics, but why is it important to also talk about it in the context of things? How do agencies currently validate people and things?
So at the Department of Labor, we're currently looking at, so we're starting. How do you eat an elephant is the phrase, right? One piece at a time. And so the way that we're doing is we're focusing right now on people, the privileged access users, and then moving on to the services, and then moving on to RPAs, and then IoTs as well. And through our privileged access management system that we use here at the Department of Labor, we'll be able to move in that direction to be able to ensure that the right service or the right person has the right access at the right times for the right reasons, but continuously, right? And that's kind of that's one of the foundations of the zero trust in itself as well.
So how can new approaches to digital identity reshape the government's approach to identifying things like supply chains, IoT networks, and records management?
Yeah, so there's just setting up a department. We have a supply chain department here at the Department of Labor that looks into supply chain management, but also the risks that are associated with that as well. So I think, forming a tiger team and, setting up departments would help. But again, I go back to the guidance and formulating not just department-wide, but like cross-agency-wide working groups to be able to discuss either lessons learned or POCs. The great thing about working here at the Department of Labor is we're able to discuss with vendors, integrators like yourself, new up and coming technologies to be able to solve solutions like this as well.
What we've seen is establishing a digital identity fabric, as I like to call it, for the United States. It can lend itself to a lot of use cases that are not necessarily digital identity, but that need to be tracked similarly. The example I gave previously was tracts of land. It could be other properties. So, for example, cars. They can also be correlated with people, stored on a blockchain, and their ownership transferred between individuals digitally, as opposed to through paperwork and just records and systems that can be edited at any time. And the possibilities are endless. Records can be appended with things like healthcare records. Verifiable credentials can be issued by other authorities for completely different reasons than government issued IDs. So, for example, a pass to get into an amusement park can be issued in that manner. So, these new approaches with the fabric established at the federal level can really exponentially improve quality of life across the U.S. as the use cases are applied to as systems are applied to other use cases.
Mir, you mentioned this kind of life cycle, and I'm paraphrasing here, so bear with me. But Pam, privileged access management, leading to services, leading to the continuous verification of identity. It seems to me that there's a direct tie to what you're talking about with this government-wide push, I'll call it, for seamless user experiences. What can these new digital identity technologies do to help leverage, support, and enhance UX across government?
Yeah. So here at Labor, we've looked at the user experience and providing frictionless authentication through SSOing over 170 plus applications here at the Department of Labor. As mentioned, we leverage login.gov from GSA. We have 24 applications there today for our external facing applications here at the Department of Labor. The unemployment insurance, we're working with 4 states. Another 2 is coming online very soon. And we're continuously working with a total of 19 states to be able to provide those services as well. But I think not only providing that experience to our end users, but also reducing the amount of time an individual, whether they're a Fed or contractor, onboards to the Department of Labor. So working with our solution here at ICAM with other services, like the onboarding system that most agencies have, and ensuring and reducing the amount of time it takes to onboard an individual So all this comes into play with regards to the end user experience from the time they join, the time they move, or the time that they leave. So providing that seamless, as you said, experience to the end user, but it's also a cost savings and the efficiency benefit to labor here.
Rayon, you can tell that Amir is a very modest person because he drops those numbers just so casually. I mean, single sign-on for 170 plus applications across labor strikes me as a staggering initiative. Am I reading that right?
It is. So single sign-on, some agencies are have less adoption than others. Some agencies actually have multiple single sign-on providers, so it worsens user experience and says that people have, do I log in with this ID or do I log in with that ID? But definitely from a single sign-on perspective, for internal authentication, it's critical getting people into systems. They can also be leveraged as a foothold to do things like provision people's access to systems automatically or upon request, so that they already have access to those systems when they join or as soon as it's a request, as opposed to waiting for somebody to manually process a ticket.
Amir, because you work with those 19 different states, I would also imagine that you have to approach SSO or single sign-on in different ways for different states all across the country. Am I reading that right?
Every state is so. The IDP is vendor agnostic. So as long as they have an identity service provider, choose your flavor. I think that's where we want to get to, rather than username and password. So that's been our goal here at Department of Labor, is to be able to mitigate any username or passwords. A lot of talk has been, with regards to passwordless. And so as we SSO our internal applications, as we provide multi-factor authentication, as we implement Windows Hello, and experiment with passkeys with Windows Hello and biometric authentication to your Windows machine. All this comes into play with the frictionless experience that I'd say frictionless, but also secure experience that we're providing our DOL users.
Well, gentlemen, I'm going to move us into what I'll call our lightning round here, and let's hypothesize a little bit. Future risks of not acting on digital identity. Amir, why should this be top of mind for agency leaders out there?
Because, that's an excellent question. I think it's extremely important because the attack surface starts with that individual, whether it's through phishing, and ensuring that there's a secure method for that authentication, and ensuring who you are and who you say you are, with regards to coming onto any network or authenticating as well.
So we're modernizing services that are externally facing, modernizing digital identity there. One of the key things we saw during the coronavirus pandemic was rampant fraud of services provided by the government, just because really identity proofing services weren't well established. There were ways to fake your identity using stolen information. And that goes back to what I was saying with you're entering your social security number 200 times. That's 200 different over the course of your life, perhaps, just as a guess. So each time you're entering that and it's being stored is a place that if it gets breached, your SSN is not compromised, and so is your other information, which can then be used to claim unemployment benefits on your behalf. So from a risk perspective, reducing fraud and efficiently allocating government funds to really those who need them is critical in implementing proper identity proofing methods and authentication methods for existing users of government services. I think is critical to protecting funds that agencies are supposed to distribute fairly.
I'll just jump in with a question to both of you, starting with Amir. I think hearing all of this, you really make a compelling case for why and what. But what about the when? When can we expect to see these sorts of things in the mainstream?
Well, I'll say this: it's the 3 Ps. So patience, persistence, and people. Right. So begin with the federal government and transitioning from private sector to the government. You have to have patience and also persistence as well. And it's the people, the integrators like yourselves, that do provide that. As far as the when, all I could say is we do have a roadmap. We do conversate have those conversations cross agency wide, and looking at vendor space. We attend a lot of conferences and see what industry is doing and where that leads, and then we take it to leadership and brief and look and currently assess our. So I'd say I'm more of a Kaizen, continuously improvement. So we'll look at our ICAM program, see what improvements that we can implement, and try to implement that with management support. So as far as the when, it's a work in progress is what I can say to you. But I think I'm very persistent when it comes to moving in that direction and following best practice and best in breed.
Thank you. Any comments, Ryan?
Yeah, from a when perspective, definitely agencies individually are making great strides now. And also at the state level, when we talk about individual and citizen identity, initiatives like mobile driver's licenses, which increasingly more states are adopting, paved the way for the federal government to implement its own services, like I was mentioning, with verifiable credentials to issue government IDs, such as the SSN. These, of course, will need to be funded. These initiatives need to be executed by whatever agencies decided to execute them. And we're getting there. I think the Biden administration currently understands that. There has been talk about an executive order on digital identity. In addition to, there have been attempts at congressional legislation that I think are continuing about modernizing digital identity across the government, at least from a citizen perspective.
Amir, I'd like to talk a little bit, or maybe double down on the part of our conversation about keeping citizens' digital identities secure and free from improper access. Before we went on the air, you talked about Department of Labor having pretty strict standards here. Give us a deep dive, sir.
This, as far as strict standards with regards to identity proofing. So as I mentioned, we leverage login.gov for our external users for the unemployment insurance. We're working with partners, the USPS, as I said, 19,000 locations to be able to do in-person proofing with the United States Postal Service as well. And as far as internally, we go through a rigorous process, obviously following this standards, and also zero trust as well on onboarding and offboarding. As does every government agency, right? So,
Farouk, anything you wanted to kind of pile on there or foot stomp?
Yeah, one thing I want to foot stomp is the aspect of doing identity proofing at post offices. So one of the things that agencies have done historically is that they need to identity proof somebody, they do it themselves. So for example, if I need a passport, the Department of State will proof me itself historically. So having a government service like login.gov providing proofing and providing it in a means that people can easily access it, so every town has a post office, is powerful. Capabilities like this really help us get away from storage of identity information and also excessive storage of identity information by individual agencies, as well as providing a means to just ensure somebody is who they say they are and reducing fraud.
Amir, what advice would you give to other agencies looking to craft strategies around digital identity?
I mean, I'll just, 3 Ps again, but I also think communication is very important. So communicating with our stakeholders and understanding, not just, implementing a tool, but understanding how business works. Each agency is different. Each agency has their nuances, but really taking the time and due diligence and just not throwing something into production and saying, okay, but working with the agency stakeholders. As I said, there's 27 different missions here at the Department of Labor. That's 460 offices. Each office has their particular way of onboarding and offboarding. So taking the time, and that's where the patience comes in, and working with the business stakeholder and understanding how do they onboard, what rights do they get, what application rights, and forming a matrix, so to speak, with each of those agencies. And that kind of leads into the Zero Trust initiative of RBAC and role-based. Eventually, we'll get there where we're introducing UBA that is just one identity, and based off of user behavior analytics and AI, we can determine in real time whether Joe Schmuckatelli, who just got onboarded to the specific Department of Labor, that they're not acting nefariously, right? That again, that's something that we're thinking about, something that we haven't implemented yet. But really, communicating with the stakeholders, being patient, being persistent, and obviously, people is an important aspect of it as well. But and I think the only other thing that I can think of is education, but educating senior leadership on the business impact and also the benefits of implementing a solution or going towards a specific framework as well.
Ryan, similar question for you. What resources or advice would you provide to agency leaders looking for digital identity solutions?
I'd say one of the things that we've seen is big bang initiatives tend to go off course quickly. So let's say I've suddenly obtained funding to conduct a digital identity modernization in my agency. The gut reaction is to launch a massive initiative using that funding to execute. However, what we've seen works best is to assess your identity landscape, identify what the highest priority items are to remediate, and do a controlled ramp up of your modernization versus going at it all at once. That enables you to take calculated risks. It also prevents situations where if the program goes off track, you're not losing substantial amounts of money and you're able to get back on course more easily than if you were to launch and try to do everything in one go.
Amir, Rayon, thanks so much for joining us today. To learn more about today's discussion, we encourage you to visit www.accenturefederal.com. This was the Federal Innovator, a video podcast series. My co-host today, co-pilot Dr. Jennifer Sample, Managing Director at Accenture Federal Services.
Bye, everyone.
This was Logging Into the Future of Identity for GovExec TV. I'm George Jackson. Have a great day.